What kind of daughter burns her father's world to ash with 3 words? I'm the kind who stands in her mother's kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, overnight bag still slung over my shoulder, saying, "Burn it all." No greeting, no preamble, just a match struck in the dark. I'm a detective with the Metropolitan Police, trained to notice the weight of silence. And when my lawyer, Henry, pauses on the line, his breath catching like he's giving me one last chance to reconsider, I know the game's already started. "You're sure?" he asks. I've never been more sure. Less than an hour ago, I'd come off a 48-hour surveillance detail, the kind that leaves your eyes gritty and your coffee cold. I didn't head to my apartment. Something pulled me to the little house on the edge of town where my mother still lives, where the air smells of lemon dish soap and secrets. The front door was unlocked, as always, but the silence inside was wrong, heavy, like a held breath. I called her name, my voice echoing down the hallway. She stood at the kitchen sink, hands buried in soapy water, the late afternoon light slanting through the window to catch the purple bloom on her right eye. Her knuckles were red, scraped raw, and when she glanced at me, startled, her eyes dropped back to the dishes. "Don't worry about me," she said, soft as a script she'd memorized years ago. I stepped closer, my boots heavy on the linoleum. "Who did it?" The words came sharp, but she shook her head, quick and final. "Just don't." My phone buzzed then, a message from a number I didn't know, just a link. I tapped it, and there he was, my father, on a yacht I didn't know he owned, sunglasses perched on his smug face, a champagne flute raised, his arm around a woman half his age in a red dress that billowed like a cheap ad. The caption read, "Life's too short not to enjoy the ride." My stomach knotted, cold and tight. I didn't ask my mother the obvious questions. I didn't need to. I turned, walked to my childhood bedroom, the same furniture holding ghosts of posters long gone. In the corner, under a folded quilt, sat a black safe. I spun the combination, numbers I'd memorized like a prayer, and opened it. My service weapon gleamed inside, next to evidence envelopes and a slim leather case. I flipped it open. My gold detective's shield caught the dim light, and tucked beneath it was an envelope marked with Henry's firm, Peterson and Hale. It had waited there for months, sealed, patient. I slipped the badge into my jacket, the envelope under my arm, and returned to the kitchen. My mother didn't look up. I kissed her temple, the skin warm and fragile, and left. In my car, the world sharpened. The rumble of a truck down the street, a dog barking 2 houses over, my own breath loud in my ears. The badge pressed against my ribs, a small weight carrying years of promises. I dialed Henry's private line. He answered on the second ring. "Detective," he said, and I cut him off. "Burn it all." Silence. Then his voice, measured. "Once I start, there's no stopping. You know that." "That's the point," I said. When I hung up, my reflection flickered in the rearview mirror, eyes hard like a suspect who knows the cuffs are coming. But this time, the cuffs weren't for me. This wasn't about his mistress or his midlife crisis. It was about my mother's bruises, the ones that faded outside but never inside, and the file I'd built page by page on his business dealings, construction contracts, shell companies, money that moved like a river he controlled. I was his daughter, yes, but I was also a cop. I knew where to hit, so he'd never stand again. The smell of lemon dish soap clings to me, a scent that rewinds my bones to when I was 10, cheek pressed against the kitchen door, wood grain biting my skin. The radio played soft, always soft, my mother humming to cover what she didn't want me to hear. "Why is this house never quiet?" my father would say, though it was silent except for the clink of plates and her murmured apology, a sound like wind through a cracked window. His voice, even at a whisper, made the room obey. I learned early to memorize floorboards that didn't creak, to vanish into the utility closet with a Walkman, pretending I couldn't hear the storm brewing. I learned to lie at school when teachers asked about my mother's cabinet bruises. Cabinets, I found, were the clumsiest killers in our town. Some nights, she'd sit on my bed, her face lit by the hallway nightlight, whispering, "Baby, don't worry about me," like a promise we both knew was a sentence. My father wasn't always a monster. There were pancake mornings, his forearms dusted with flour, or photos of us squinting at the sun in a park. But control can look like kindness if you squint hard enough. He ran his company the way he ran our house: schedules, numbers, silence bought with cash. I didn't understand money then, but I understood the weight it carried, the way it kept my mother tethered. Now in the car, the sun dipped low, painting the street in gold and shadow. I put the car in gear, the engine's hum steadying my pulse. This wasn't rage, not yet. It was a perimeter I'd been drawing for years, closing in. I'd learned my mother's routines, the neighbors who kept their porches lit, the sound of my father's car on her street. The yacht photo wasn't random, it was a signal, a crack in his fortress. I wasn't powerless anymore. I was ready. My father's voice still echoed in my head as I drove away from my mother's house, the badge in my pocket a quiet anchor. At 16, I'd learned what silence could do. I got a job bagging groceries, not because we needed the money, my father's construction empire ensured we never did, but because standing behind a register, feet aching from honest work, felt like freedom. I carried eggs home like they were a crown, my own coins jingling in my pocket. He hated it. Not the job itself, but what it meant. His daughter, visible in the world without his leash. One night, he stood in the front hall, holding a receipt I'd left on the table, his voice low and sharp. "You don't need to do that," he said. "We're not that kind of people." I looked him in the eye, a spark of defiance I hadn't known I had. "We're the kind of people who eat," I said, and walked past him. He didn't speak to me for 3 days. His silence wasn't empty. It was a weapon, heavy as a closed fist, teaching me that absence could cut deeper than words. I learned to wield my own silence in return, strategic and sharp, a shield I'd carry into adulthood. The night I turned 18, I sat in my childhood bedroom, the same one where I'd later keep that safe, and filled out the police academy application, while the evening news droned in the living room. My father laughed when I told him, his voice curling around the word uniform, like it was a child's costume. "You, sweetheart," he said, as if he could save me from myself. No. My mother, though, put her hands to her mouth, like she'd seen a magic trick and feared clapping would break it. I went anyway. The academy was a revelation, honest about pain in a way my father's house never was. Push-ups until your arms shook weren't punishment, they built strength for a purpose. Running until your lungs burned meant you could one day chase a scream. The drills gave me a language I'd been practicing in the dark: breath, focus, command, restraint. On the range, an instructor adjusted my grip and said, "Trust your hands." He meant muscle memory, but it clicked deeper. My hands, my choice, my life. Those years of defiance weren't just rebellion, they were training. I'd memorized the rhythm of my father's control, the way he'd make pancakes one morning, flour dusting his forearms like snow, then turn the house church silent with a single glance. Gifts came on his schedule, flashy apologies disguised as generosity, a necklace, a car, a vacation we couldn't refuse. Control wore kindness like a mask. His construction company was no different. Immaculate schedules, numbers that always added up, crews that didn't question, cash flowing like a river he could redirect with a wrench. I didn't understand the machinery of money then, but I felt its weight in the way my mother moved, her shoulders curved inward, her apologies soft as wind through a cracked window. At 16, bagging groceries, I learned the price of eggs, of independence. I learned that my father didn't like his family seen in the world without his permission, didn't like the scent of other people's dinners on my clothes. That job was my first perimeter, a line I drew around myself. The academy built on that. It taught me to draw perimeters around others, to stand steady when chaos screamed. I remember my first week, a drill sergeant barking about stance, about letting your mind do the math even when your body wanted to bolt. I thought of the utility closet, the Walkman, the floorboards that didn't creak. I'd been training for this my whole life. When I graduated, Henry was there, the lawyer who'd become my ally, clapping quietly from the back. My father didn't come. My mother did, her face lit with that same fragile glow from my childhood nightlight. "Baby," she whispered, "don't worry about me." But I did. Worry was my inheritance, sharp and constant, like the badge I'd earn. The one now pressing against my ribs as I drove through the gold and shadow streets. That night in the car, I thought of the receipt my father had held. The way his gaze skimmed past me like I wasn't worth a direct strike. I thought of the academy, the way it taught me to hold a line, to trust my hands. I was no longer the girl who hid in closets. I was a cop, building a box around my father's empire, piece by piece. The yacht photo, the bruises, the envelope in my safe, they weren't random. They were evidence, breadcrumbs he'd left because he thought no one was hungry enough to follow. I was. The sun had set now, the dashboard lights casting a faint glow. I turned onto the highway, the hum of the engine steadying my pulse. Henry's words echoed, "There's no stopping." Good. I didn't want to stop. I wanted to finish what I'd started the day I chose a badge over a father's approval. The precinct smelled like burnt coffee and toner, a familiar hum that grounded me as I sat at my desk. The badge on my hip a steady weight. My first domestic call as a rookie had come 6 months into the job, my knees buzzing under my uniform pants as the dispatcher's voice crackled. Neighbors heard shouting, possible injury. My training officer, Morales, smelled like spearmint gum and moved with a surgeon's precision. As we pulled onto a narrow street, she met my eyes. "Don't decide the ending before you know the story," she said. The house was tidy. Too tidy, the kind of tidy that hides something. A woman answered the door, sleeves tugged past her knuckles, hair damp like she'd scrubbed away the night. A man loomed behind her, his swagger claiming the room. "Everything okay?" Morales asked. The woman smiled too fast. "We're fine," she said, echoed a split second later by the man. Morales let the silence sit, heavy, until it sagged. "Ma'am, could we speak in the kitchen?" In there, lemon dish soap sat by the sink, and my throat tightened. The woman's sleeve slipped, revealing a bruise like a thunderhead on her wrist. We didn't lecture. We separated, documented, offered resources, built a door where there'd been a wall. As I wrote the report, the man's voice drifted from the living room. "She's dramatic. It's a misunderstanding." I'd heard those words my whole life, older versions in my father's cadence. On the porch, Morales asked, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and it didn't feel like a lie. She studied me. "You held the line, that matters." That call changed me. It gave worry edges, a shape I could grip. I started drawing a perimeter around my mother, noting her routines, the neighbors with lit porches, the sound of my father's car on her street. I didn't plan to take him down then, not consciously. But 2 years ago, a jammed precinct printer changed everything. Digging through a mess of pages, parking citations mostly, I found a subpoena request from the White Collar Crimes Unit for North Shore Development LLC, my father's company. The address matched his office. I could have handed it back, pretended I saw nothing. Instead, I read it twice, slipped it into a manila folder, and took it home. That was the first piece of the box I'd build with Henry. From there, it grew slow, deliberate, like a tree taking root. Public court filings gave me bank statements, property records tied to shell companies he'd laughed about at family dinners. Photos surfaced of him with men whose names stayed out of social pages but littered business ones. I wasn't hunting for revenge, not at first, just answers about the machinery that kept my mother tethered. As a cop, you learn abuse isn't just bruises. It's contracts you don't understand until they own your house. Credit cards in your name you didn't sign for. A world woven from threads someone else holds. My father was the weaver, my mother the fabric, clinging to his threads because she believed she couldn't survive without them. I suggested divorce once, years back. "It would destroy me," she said, and I couldn't tell if she meant money or heart or both. So I stopped pushing and started collecting names, dates, a timeline that could stand in court. Henry was my partner in this, a man carved from mahogany and patience. He didn't ask why I wanted property searches on my father's companies or why I brought photos of yacht registrations and invoices for projects in cities he had no reason to touch. "We'll build a box," he said, "and when it's strong, we'll drop it over him." I liked that. No shouting matches, no daughter's tantrum, just a box, quiet and controlled. The folder grew heavier over months, a sapling becoming a tree. I found leases signed by Elise, his mistress, a real estate broker whose social media posts leaned into the camera, necklines catching the light. Her signature appeared on property transfers to my father's shell companies, deals with profits that didn't add up. Henry traced cash from Cayman accounts to her brother's name, a web of fraud or laundering or both. At family lunches, I played my part, offering safe stories about traffic stops while noting my father's new watch, his cash payments, the tan line where a ring used to be. He never asked about my life, assuming the badge meant I was alone. His mistake. The precinct's hum faded as I left that night, the folder in my bag heavier than my gun. The city lights blurred past, and I thought of Morales, of holding the line. My mother's bruises, the yacht photo, the subpoena, they were lines too, connecting in a pattern only I could see. I was hungry for it. The city's pulse thrummed through my car's open window as I drove from the precinct, the badge in my pocket, a quiet reminder of the line I'd crossed. Telling Henry to burn it all wasn't a whim. It was the key turning in a lock I'd built over years. His office was my next stop, a low brick building that smelled of leather and old paper, where he waited with a flowchart taped to the wall. Red lines tying company names to account numbers. "We're live," he said, handing me a stack of drafts. Asset freeze orders, subpoenas for 3 banks, 2 title companies, and Elise's brokerage, plus an emergency protective order for my mother. "This is a siege," he warned, tapping the chart. "He'll feel the walls closing by noon tomorrow." I nodded, picturing my father's face when his card declined at some polished restaurant, his smile faltering. The plan was precise, no wild swings, just the law's slow grind, his own weapon turned against him. I left Henry's office with a copy of the protective order, its pages crisp, and drove back to my mother's house, the night air sharp with impending rain. She was in the living room, folding laundry into neat stacks, a nervous habit. The TV murmured a home renovation show, hammers and paint rollers filling the silence. I set the papers on the coffee table. "I need you to sign this," I said. She glanced at them, then at me, her face tightening. "What is it?" "Protective order," I said. "It keeps him away legally." She folded a towel, pressing the edges flat. "I told you, I don't want a scene." I sat on the couch's edge, voice low. "This isn't a scene, Mama. It's space he can't cross. If he shows up, we have recourse. Without it, he does what he wants." Her hands paused, hovering over the towel. "You think that'll stop him?" "No," I said, "but it'll stop him thinking he's untouchable. It gives us leverage." She stared at the paper, then picked up the pen, her fingers lingering before she signed, her name a careful press into the page. I exhaled, the weight of her signature heavier than my badge. Back in my car, I thought of the safe in my old room, the envelope from Henry's firm waiting there like a coiled spring. It held the blueprint of our box, dates, account numbers, photos of Elise's signatures on shady deals. I'd been building it since that printer jam, each piece a brick in a wall my father couldn't climb. Henry had already filed the first subpoenas that morning, targeting North Shore Development's accounts and Elise's real estate firm. By noon, 3 personal accounts and the main corporate one would be frozen, numbers locked with a keystroke. I imagined my father reaching for his phone, the waiter hovering awkwardly. Step 2 was paper trails. Subpoenas for records that would map his money's flow, from offshore accounts to properties flipped at improbable profits. Step 3 was the protective order, giving my mother a shield she'd never had. Every text or call he sent now could be a violation, evidence stacking like kindling. Driving home, the streets gleamed wet under streetlights, the wiper's rhythm steadying my pulse. I thought of my childhood, the utility closet where I'd hide, the Walkman drowning out my father's voice. "Why is this house never quiet?" he'd say, though it was silent except for my mother's apologies, soft as cracked glass. I'd learned to disappear then, but now I was visible. A cop with a badge and a purpose. The lemon dish soap scent lingered in my memory, tying me to that kitchen, to her bruises. I'd suggested divorce once, years ago, and she'd said it would destroy her. I didn't argue. I built instead. Files, timelines, a plan that didn't need her to be brave at the worst moment. Henry's box was sturdy now, and we were dropping it over him. The next morning, my phone buzzed with Henry's update. The freezes were in place, subpoenas served. A process server was en route to Elise's office, a manila envelope heavier than any bullet. I pictured her in one of her camera-ready dresses, her smile slipping as she read the summons. My father would know by lunch, his fortress cracking. I didn't feel joy, not exactly. Just the calm of a perimeter closing. At the precinct, I filed a report on a petty theft case, the routine grounding me. Morales passed my desk, tossing me a spearmint gumstick. "You look focused," she said. "Always," I replied, but my mind was on the courthouse, on the papers my mother had signed, on the machine we'd set in motion. This wasn't about rage. It was about control slipping from his hands into mine, into the laws. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled of petrichor, sharp and clean. I was ready for the counterattack. The precinct's hum, radio crackles, coffee machine gurgles, felt like a tether as I sat at my desk, the weight of my badge grounding me against the storm I knew was coming. Henry's call came at noon, his voice steady but clipped. The bank accounts were frozen, subpoenas served, and the protective order filed. My father would feel the walls closing by now, his fortress of numbers and charm cracking under the law's quiet pressure. I pictured him at some upscale lunch, Elise at his side, his card declined, his jaw tightening as he reached for his phone. But he didn't call me, not yet. Instead, the counterattack came through polished channels. A cream-colored letter arrived at the precinct, heavy stock with raised lettering, delivered like a royal decree. Inside, his attorneys demanded cessation, threatened defamation, promised ruin. Henry read it at his office, setting it down like a used napkin. "Noise," he said. "They want you rattled." I'd been rattled before, as a girl hiding in a closet, Walkman drowning out my father's voice. It didn't last. "Let them try," I said, my voice steady as the badge on my hip. By afternoon, the smear began. A local gossip site ran a piece. Prominent business leader harassed by estranged daughter, a police detective. A photo of me leaving the courthouse, face carved by noon sun, made me look harder than I felt. The article quoted sources close to the family, calling my mother fragile, me a daughter nursing adolescent grudges. Comments were a mix, vicious, supportive, confused. A retired nurse wrote, "I used to see women come in with stories about cabinets. I printed it, slid it into the folder, not as evidence but as truth." Elise went loud online, posting a selfie with a caption like a press release. "Women in business are always targets. Envy is a disease." By evening, another post showed her wrist, faintly red, captioned, "Abuse from whom?" with 42,000 likes. My chest burned, old and hot, but I let it pass. You don't yell at a hurricane, you navigate it. Henry filed a motion to compel Elise's email chains, not just summaries, targeting a property deal that reeked of fraud. "She'll comply or she'll blink," he said. Either way, we'd learn something. Then came Frank Delaney, my father's former partner, a man in a suit worn thin, tie defeated. He arrived at Henry's office unannounced, hands like he'd built things before money taught him to outsource. "You look like your mother," he said, catching himself. "A compliment." "It is," I replied. He sat only after I did, as if weighing whether I'd earned his story. They'd started North Shore development in a rented garage, my father the brain, Frank the hands. But the brains turned to shortcuts. Bids lowballed, costs padded, inspectors softened with lunches. A worker fell from scaffolding, paid off in cash to stay quiet, but his wife didn't. Frank slid an envelope across the desk. Invoices, a calendar with payment dates, 2 photos of the injured man, his name scrawled in blue ink. "Why now?" Henry asked. "Because I saw the news," Frank said. "Because I knew your mother once. Because the girl who counted picnic scores on her fingers shouldn't carry this alone." The room shifted, gravity changing. This wasn't just about my mother's bruises or my father's yacht. It was a pattern of harm, radiating to workers, buyers, the city itself. My father's calls started that night. I let them go to voicemail, his voice a metronome of control, soft, then sharp. "Sweetheart, this is beneath you," he said in one. "You're making a fool of your mother," in another. Henry archived them, saying, "He's performing for himself and his lawyers, hoping a judge hears you as unhinged." I nodded. Let them hear the subtext. Each message was evidence, another brick in our box. The deputy chief called me in, coat slung over his chair, face neutral. "Your father alleges misuse of resources," he said. "Time, access, the badge's prestige." I met his eyes. "Any complaint needs to be formal, in writing. Let internal affairs do their job." He nodded, a faint approval. "Stay clean. You know the drill." I lived the drill. Back at my desk, the precinct's sounds, rain on half-open doors, patrol's low laughter steadied me. My father wanted to drag me into the dark, but he'd have to get past a building full of people who knew honest work. Henry's charts grew denser, red lines tying Elise's deals to offshore accounts, Frank's documents to old crimes. This was no longer just a family matter. It was negligence, bribery, endangerment. The DA's office was circling, and I felt a strange calm, like the moment before a perimeter snapped shut. Driving home, the city smelled of wet asphalt and possibility. I thought of Morales, her spearmint gum, her words about holding the line. My mother's signature on that protective order, Frank's envelope, the voicemails, they were lines too, converging. I wasn't just hungry now, I was hunting. The courthouse steps gleamed slick with morning rain, each one a test of balance as I climbed, my badge tucked in my purse instead of on my belt. Today wasn't for uniforms, it was for precision, the kind that cuts without a sound. Inside, the air hummed with fluorescent lights and the sharp echo of heels on marble, lawyers murmuring like a low tide. Henry waited outside the courtroom, one hand in his pocket, the other clutching a slim leather portfolio. "You ready?" he asked, eyes scanning my face. I nodded. "Is he here?" Henry's gaze flicked to the double doors, front row center, with Elise. We walked in together. My father sat exactly where Henry said, navy suit crisp, a smirk playing at his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. Elise, in a cream blouse, sat beside him, her posture caught between concern and calculation, like they were posing for a magazine spread about untouchable winners. The judge entered, mid-50s, square-shouldered, glasses perched halfway down her nose. She didn't waste time. "Counsel, are we prepared to proceed?" Henry rose. "We are, Your Honor." The opposing counsel, silver-haired with a face like polished granite, echoed him, but launched into a protest about the subpoena's scope. The judge raised a hand. "You'll have your turn." "Petitioner, begin." Henry started with the protective order, laying out photos of my mother's injuries, each bruise dated, signed by physicians, a timeline of pain. The room was silent except for the rustle of pages as the judge turned them. My father's lawyer objected, claiming irrelevance. "Overruled," the judge said. "Go on." Henry shifted to the financials, a projector casting spreadsheets on a screen, corporate ledgers showing transfers to shell companies, then to Elise's brokerage, matched with wire receipts from offshore accounts. My father's jaw tightened, but his gaze stayed fixed on the table. Then came Frank Delaney, walking to the stand with a slow, deliberate step, one hand brushing the railing. His voice was steady, recounting the scaffolding incident. A worker paid off to stay quiet, inspectors bribed with lunches, invoices signed in my father's hand. He tapped the envelope he'd brought, saying, "I kept records, not because I knew this day would come, but because truth lives in ink." The lawyer tried to shake him on cross, pressing on dates, memory. Frank didn't flinch, his hands folded like a man who'd built something honest once. The surprise came when the DA's office stepped in. A young prosecutor in a charcoal suit rose, announcing a parallel criminal investigation based on our evidence. The judge leaned back, glasses glinting. "Proceed." The prosecutor displayed Elise's closing documents, highlighting inflated valuations funneled through my father's companies, moved offshore within hours. Elise's fingers curled tight in her lap, her cream blouse suddenly stark against her flushed skin. The lawyer objected, arguing this was a civil matter. "Fraud is fraud," the judge said. "The DA has my leave to continue." My mother's testimony came last, and it cut the room like glass. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize, just spoke in a tone so steady it anchored the air. She described years of being told she couldn't survive without him, finances too complex to grasp, bruises no one's business. The DA asked, "Why now?" She glanced at me, then back. "Because my daughter showed me a box she built, and I realized I didn't have to live in his." The HVAC's hum was the only sound left. Henry rested our case. My father's posture had shifted, no smirk now, shoulders forward, elbows braced on the table. Elise sat, angled toward the aisle, a fractional distance between them. The judge took a moment, her pen tapping once. "Based on the evidence, I'm granting the protective order in full. All joint accounts remain frozen pending investigation. The respondent will produce corporate ledgers within 10 business days. This matter is referred for criminal review." A murmur rippled through the gallery. My father turned, his eyes meeting mine, disbelief sharper than anger, like he couldn't fathom his fortress crumbling from within. I didn't blink. We filed out, reporters clustering at the steps, cameras ready. Henry kept his voice low. "This isn't over." "I know," I said, the air sharp with petrichor. Elise's heels clicked fast as she declined a question, retreating. My father said nothing to the press, his silence louder than any headline. I paused at the curb, looking back at the courthouse's columns, its promise that truth could stand. Today it had. Tomorrow we'd keep building. The precinct smelled of damp uniforms and burnt coffee, a a familiar rhythm that steadied me as I sat at my desk, the badge on my hip a quiet pulse. The courthouse victory was still fresh, its echo lingering in my bones, but I knew my father wouldn't go quietly. His first move came through voicemail, his voice a metronome of control, soft, then sharp. "Sweetheart, this is beneath you," he said in one, archived by Henry. "You're making a fool of your mother," in another. I didn't reply, letting each message stack like evidence, another brick in the box we'd built. The smear widened. A gossip site's headline, "Business leader harassed by detective daughter," spun a tale of my mother's fragility and my grudges. Comments stung, but a nurse's note about cabinet stories stayed with me, slipped into my folder for its truth, not its weight in court. Elise's posts flared online, her wrist faintly red in a photo, captioned, "Abuse from whom?" I let the heat in my chest pass, focusing on Henry's next move, a motion to compel Elise's full email chains, forcing her to reveal or retreat. The real shift came on a Thursday, 7:15 a.m., when Henry called, his voice alert, almost eager. "We got the judge," he said. Full access to his corporate ledgers, 10 years back. It was like opening every locked drawer in my father's life. Contracts, payouts, deals that didn't match the blueprints. I sat in my kitchen, coffee cooling, thinking of his favorite line, "You can't fight what you can't see." Now we saw everything. Later I drove past the marina, the yacht gleaming but silent, no music, no champagne. I parked far enough to watch unnoticed, remembering that photo, his smug smile, Elise's red dress. He'd posted it to prove he was untouchable. I'd kept it to prove he wasn't. The plea deal came in March, a glacier with teeth. Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to bribe, criminal endangerment. My father took it, not out of remorse. Apologies were his cufflinks, decorative, but because the math was clear. Prison loomed, and he chose the smaller number. The DA demanded restitution for workers, buyers, city fines, back taxes, an amount that made me sit down. Elise cut her own deal, cooperating to avoid prison, her real estate license banned, her posture slumping under a fine. In her final DA interview, she said, "I was scared," her voice small, truer than her posts. "Of whom?" the prosecutor asked. "Everyone," she said, staring at the table. I drove to my mother's house that evening, the sky heavy with spring's first warmth. She was cooking spaghetti, too much garlic, the way I liked it. We ate quietly, red sauce splattering like small moons on our plates. "You don't have to stay," she said, folding foil over the pan. "I know," I said, "but I want to see you lock the door." She did. The deadbolts click louder than the meal's silence. The next day, we went to the bank. The clerk handed her a folder, accounts to transfer, liens to anticipate. My mother read every word, asked questions that straightened the clerk's spine. Her signature was deliberate, a seed pressed into soil. In the car, she stared out at a sky like clean steel. "I thought it would feel like fireworks," she said. "What does it feel like?" I asked. "Like a door closing," she said, "and a window opening somewhere I can't see yet." I felt the badge in my purse, a small moon catching light, and drove us home. The plea hearing was a quiet affair, the courtroom like a house aired out. My mother sat in the second row beside Henry, in a navy skirt, no makeup, no armor needed. When the judge asked if victims wished to speak, she glanced at me. I nodded. She stood, voice steady. "I'm not here to punish," she said. "Punishment came years ago at my sink. I'm here to end harm where we choose." My father stared at the table, jaw tight. She finished. "I intend to live." Reporters swarmed outside. But Henry's brief statement and my mother's polite silence were enough. I touched my badge and kept moving. The restitution money was coming, more than my mother needed. Henry suggested a fund, small grants for women leaving violent homes, for locks, bus tickets, new names. I thought of the printer jam that started this, the box we'd built. "Call it what?" Henry asked. "Not burn it all," I said. "We burned what needed burning. Begin again." The first dispersal took 12 minutes, a locksmith and a ticket for a woman 3 towns over. We kept it quiet, no names needed. The coastal road stretched before us, salt air turning mailbox flags chalk white as I drove my mother to the cottage she'd chosen. A small square of mercy with 2 bedrooms, a worn porch, and a kitchen begging for lemon soap and sunlight. The realtor fussed over the tangled garden, but my mother waved it off. "We'll fix it," she said, and her "we" was a promise, not a plea. I hauled boxes while she made lists, our talk of paint colors, and the old piano we'd salvaged from a '98 garage sale, weaving a new rhythm. We didn't mention my father, not to erase him, but because his shadow no longer set our tempo. On the first Saturday, I built a wooden garden bed in the yard's sunniest corner, filling it with soil that smelled like rain waiting to happen. My mother brought seedlings, tomatoes, basil, strawberries with leaves like folded napkins. Morales says fear and tomatoes can't live in the same house, I said, knees in the dirt. She smiled, handing me a seedling. Let's see if it's true for gardens. We planted in pairs, basil beside tomato, marigold to ward off pests, her hum inviting bees, the sun a blessing we didn't need to ask for. My father's letter arrived in May, forwarded from Henry's office. I waited 3 days, then opened it with a butter knife, standing at my counter. He wrote of misunderstandings, associates leading him astray, the cruelty of public opinion. He called me a storm, damaging but sparing his lighthouse. No apologies, just words like cufflinks, decorative and useless. I folded it back, tucked it in a drawer. It was paper, not mine to carry. June warmed the tomatoes into green promises, my mother tying them to stakes with a gentleness I hadn't seen since I was small enough to be carried. She wore a sun hat, looking like a photo from a book about a country where promises held. I visited twice a week, sometimes more, depending on cases. When I left, she locked the door and waved from the porch, a small, triumphant motion, like a captain signaling calm seas. Work didn't pause. Domestic calls came, tidy houses and not, women with shoulders curved like my mother's once were, men filling doorways like they owned the air. I drew perimeters, wrote reports that fit like hinges, smooth and strong. The Begin Again Fund grew, dispersing quietly, locks, bus tickets, a name change for a woman who needed to vanish. Henry called after each approval, his voice soft. It doesn't need our names, he said. The first tomato ripened in July, a slow sunrise. My mother plucked it, laughing like I was little again, and we sliced it over the sink, salt dusting our wrists. It tastes like a decision, she said. That night, the ocean breathed steady, and I stepped onto the porch, typing a message I'd delayed. If you've listened this far, thank you, I wrote to strangers, neighbors, nurses who remembered cabinets. If this sounds like your house, doors can open. Help can be quiet and real. Share this, or stay for the next story. We'll keep a light on. The porch light glowed, my badge inside catching it like a moon. My mother hummed in the kitchen, a tune without fear. The tomatoes breathed in the dark, and somewhere, a woman turned a new lock and slept. Home announced itself now. No need for me to arrive unannounced. The law had done its work, not with thunder, but with the persistence of snow, reshaping everything without a sound. Months had passed since the courthouse, the plea, the restitution. My mother's new life was a window opened, her garden a map of choices. The fund was a bridge for others, built from the ashes of my father's fortress. I stood on the porch, the air salt sharp, and felt the weight of worry lift, replaced by something softer, like soil under nails. The story wasn't over, but it was ours now, written in seedlings and signatures, in doors locked by choice. We burned what needed burning and begun again, not with fireworks, but with the quiet of a new day breaking, whispering promises that held. The ocean's breath slowed as I stood on the cottage porch, the salt air settling soft in my lungs, carrying the weight of a year that had reshaped us. My mother's hum drifted from the kitchen, a melody unburdened, weaving through the clink of dishes and the faint scent of lemon soap. The garden, once a tangle of weeds, now held rows of tomatoes and basil, their roots entwined like our promises, steady and alive. The Begin Again Fund, born from restitution, sent quiet help to women 3 towns over. Women whose stories echoed ours. Locks changed, bus tickets bought, names rewritten in fresh ink. My badge rested on the table inside, its gold catching the porch light. No longer a weight, but a tool, like the trowel I'd used to plant with her. I thought of the courthouse, the plea, the way my father's eyes held disbelief when his fortress fell. I thought of Frank's envelope, Morales's spearmint gum, Henry's charts, each a thread in a tapestry we'd woven without shouting. My mother's new home, this small square of mercy, was a window open to a sky she couldn't yet see but trusted was there. I didn't need to check her locks anymore. She turned them herself, her wave from the porch a signal of calm seas. The world beyond hummed with cases, with perimeters to draw. But here the night was gentle. the stars above whispering that healing grows quiet, like seedlings reaching for light. Like a daughter and mother finding home in the space between heartbeats.